Hello and welcome to the Unsung Sports Show, the show that takes you behind the scenes of the sports you love. Today we welcome Leon Mann, sports consultant, filmmaker, entrepreneur and campaigner. An extremely busy chap, so we're honoured to have you on the show today. Leon, thank you very much for coming on.
No, thank you, Mark, for inviting me on. Looking forward to having a chat.
Great stuff, great stuff. Well, I know there's you do so much, so we'll kind of go back if we can. Could you sort of take me back to where your passion from sport came from?
Yeah, I mean, I think like many people, my passion for sport came from giving it a go. I'd say playing, being on the school playground. I remember when I first discovered football. My parents, because of work, would drop me off at school very early, so I'd literally be in this primary school playground by myself, and
Right.
I'd wander around, and I just remember finding like a tennis ball, like a battered tennis ball. And there was nothing else to do apart from kick it against the wall. And it's interesting that I chose to kick it and not throw it or anything else. So football became the sport that I kind of really fell in love with, and just kicking that ball against the walls at school, just became an obsession. I couldn't wait to get there the next morning to kick it in a different way and to see how I could receive it back and change my body shape, etc. And then before you knew it, I was kind of like me versus 10 schoolmates, and I'd be winning the games. So I think just finding a place to be confident, finding a place to be happy, finding a way to express myself, that's where I fell in love with sport. And it's just grown from playing in school teams, playing in teams of the weekend, watching it on television. My dad is a sport obsessive, so he'd be fast asleep, and I'd want to change the rugby union maybe onto something else, and he'd say, "Don't touch the remote." It's that kind of household where sport was on all the time. So yeah, it's just always been part of my life, and I can't imagine sport not being part of my life.
It sounds very much like my household. I'd imagine yours is probably the same as well, is it?
Yeah. It's a similar place where my two daughters enjoy sport. I'd say they're exploring sport in different ways. My eldest daughter played for a team for a number of years and enjoyed that. My youngest daughter goes into the club in red and white that play in North London. Obviously, I'm a Tottenham fan, so that's a little bit difficult, but she goes in there and has fantastic training sessions with brilliant coaches at the club. Yeah, it's definitely a sporting household. So yeah, we're trying to give our kids as much an opportunity to explore the different sports that they have an interest in, be that gymnastics, be that dance, be that football, whatever it is. We kind of just want to give them the opportunity to decide what they would like to do.
Great stuff. I'll ask you a little bit about Tottenham at the end of this, but we'll dive on a little bit more. I mean, how was it? You obviously you were sports mad and then transitioned into sports media. How did that come about?
Yeah, do you know what? When I was a kid, I would play football for the school or for my team, and I wouldn't tell anyone about this. Actually, I wouldn't show anyone this necessarily, but I'd kind of keep a journal, sort of almost like this, and I'd go away and I'd sketch out the formation. I'd write who was subbed, and I'd write like a little what I didn't really understand at the time, but a match report. So this person did this person did this. It was more like a chronological list when I looked back at it now. And I didn't realize it, but that was actually the beginning of my interest in storytelling around sport. And at the time, I just found it was like maybe a little geeky thing that I did, and I wouldn't necessarily tell anyone, but I'd kind of note down in particular the things I did well, and note down if there was a special player on the opposition side. But that was the beginning of, I guess, the shoots of journalism. But I didn't recognize it in terms of that word or a career in that direction. And watching television, I wouldn't see any black people who were involved in sports journalism necessarily. Someone might be watching this and go, "Oh no, what about Garth Crooks?" But I saw Garth Crooks as a former player, rightly or wrongly. So actually, the pathway of getting into sports journalism for a young black person at that time for me was I have to go and play 400 games at the highest level of football to be able to get an opportunity. But by working for Kick It Out, Kick Racism Out football campaign, as they were known back in 2001 when I joined the campaign as a volunteer at first, and then went on to work for the campaign. You know, that showed me a different perspective on working in the media. So I met people like Darren Lewis at the Daily Mirror, met people like Rodney Hines, met a guy called Hepburn Harrison Graham, who was working behind the scenes as a senior editor in radio. So I met black people. And through that, it gave me the confidence to say I can give this a bit of a go. Applied for an entry-level job when I was 28 to get into the BBC, got it, took a bit of a pay cut to go into the BBC, but because I've been working at Kick It Out, I've made some really great contacts, people like Rio Ferdinand, Micah Richards, etc. Like I'd kind of met them along the journey, so I was able to have some contact with them, and they were brilliant to me because they gave me an opportunity to interview them, when actually probably in terms of experience, I had no right to go and interview them. And if I couldn't interview them for the BBC, then I would. I was very fortunate that I was doing some writing for the Voice newspaper, which is the black community's newspaper here in the UK. So because of that, I just had opportunities, and I grabbed these opportunities, and it was a real blessing to go on a journey where I got to cover Olympics, I got to make films, I got to present, I got to travel the world, all sorts of different parts of the world. Boxing was brilliant to go and watch that in parts of Eastern and Central Europe where I never thought I would ever go to. So sport has been a real blessing for me, and my journey into the sports media was fantastic, and just taught me so much about storytelling, which is a skill that applies to all areas in my view of business, because we're constantly telling stories. And if we can understand what we're trying to communicate clearly, then we can move quicker and engage more people with whatever business we're trying to do.
Yeah, it sounds like from your journal and all that kind of those scribbling notes, you could have maybe gone into another pathway of management or scouting. It sounds like a
maybe. I mean, maybe it's something that's to come. I don't know. But I just remember, I mean, look, back then there was no screens apart from your television screen, which was normally dominated by your parents. What else would I do if I just didn't go and play more football or do more running or do more exercise, or obviously go and read a book, yes, but actually my form of expression was less so reading, and it was more so, I don't know, just storytelling. And I got really excited about writing the formations up. So that was the beginning. That was the beginning of everything.
Cool, great stuff. And yeah, I have to big up Kick It Out, which is an amazing organization. And we did have Holly Varney on the show a little while back. One of the things it surprised me, actually it may not surprise you, as a question really, I guess, but she said that discrimination, not just racism, which I think was kind of what it was initially founded on, the organization, but then obviously grew to all forms of discrimination. There's actually more reported incidents. It's going up rather than going down, which she said is a shame. She'd rather be out of a job, but the way of the world is that it's going up. Does that surprise you?
It does surprise me, but I think also if we look at how technology has enabled us to get better at reporting. When I was working out, if you wanted to make a complaint, you'd have to pick up the phone, you'd have to call through to the office, someone would have to pick up the phone, write it down. It's a real long, laborious process. Whereas actually technology now means that if people feel empowered enough and confident enough, then they can sit on their phone and put in the details and press send. So therefore, I think it's easier to report things. That's not to suggest that Holly's statement about racism being on the increase is incorrect, but I just think that it's a positive that people can make reports. And number two, it's a real positive that people have the confidence to, because when I worked to Kick It Out, I would speak to lots of victims of racist abuse, and they would say, do you know what? I'm not sure I'd do this again. I'm not sure I'll go through this process again because I don't feel confidence in the system that anything will change off the back of this. I've spoken to countless players who felt the same. So if we have an increase in the reports of racism, what I take from that as part of that narrative is that people have a greater confidence in coming forward. And I think that's something that actually campaigners have really worked hard to get us to that situation where people do come forward.
Yeah. And I guess as well, sort of back in the day when I was kicking a ball badly, mostly out of touch, I think it was probably one word against another. And now there's so much, I mean, a lot of that has moved online. And so it's much more trackable. So that probably helps as well.
Big time.
To report people.
And, we're in the kind of age of, tons of information. So our understanding of discrimination, our understanding of racism is far, far greater than what it has been in the past. So actually, that again is a positive. It's a positive that people, have a greater understanding, want to take a stance, and are coming forward and actually pressing that button. They're saying, I don't accept this. Whereas I think in the past, people have said, this won't make a difference. I don't want the paperwork in my life. It's stressful enough going through racist abuse. Why the hell am I going to want to go through another part of this journey and extend it where people are going to question me? I think there were, and there still are, many, many reasons why people don't report. So in terms of increased reports, while it doesn't sound good, I think we need to know more, to interrogate the data, as data people would say, and get to the bottom of what's actually happening.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. You mentioned Rio Ferdinand there as somebody that kind of somebody you interviewed, and I've seen, I've done a bit of research, obviously, that you have gone on to, you've done the Usain Bolt documentary, done the life stories of Jermaine Defoe, Andy Cole. Were there any kind of real surprising things that have come out of those interviews?
Yeah, I mean, just today, just this week, Andy Cole's been announced that he's going to be in the Premier League Hall of Fame. And having did his documentary for ITV, where I was the interviewer, I got to speak to his parents, I got to speak to his brother, I got to speak to his family. He really did open the doors for us to get to know him a lot better. And he didn't always have the best relationship with the media, as he says himself. He didn't feel very fairly treated by the media. And as a result of that, that kind of impacts what people believe you are. So in terms of doing this life story with ITV, and it was many, many years ago, I know that, part of the why he was doing that was to help to address, some of the things that aren't true about him, his character, his beliefs. I don't think he would like to say that he was doing it deliberately to try and get his right reply out there, because he's not that kind of character. But certainly he felt it was a good opportunity when asked to do the documentary to be able to address some things. And, we sat down and did like a 4-hour interview in a freezing cold warehouse in Manchester. And, I remember, him being very emotional during that interview, something that I didn't necessarily expect. But going through somebody's life story, getting them to reflect on their journey is just such a privileged place to be, but it's kind of a very sensitive place to be as well. And when talking about his father and the racism that he suffered as a minor, he was working the mines in Nottingham as a black man. That really got Andy very emotional, understandably so. And I didn't see it coming, just because of the kind of proud character that he was. And of course, he could be proud and emotional. I think we've all been on a bit of a journey, but I think there's always been a reluctance to show too much emotion, as men in particular. So actually, during that interview, I felt that we moved beyond the here's a question, here's an answer, but we actually managed to find a space where he was willing to trust and willing to share his truth in that space. And I felt very privileged to be in that position. Similarly with Jermaine Defoe, Jermaine Defoe and I did an interview in St. Lucia. I was lucky enough to go back to look at his roots in St. Lucia. And he started talking about his grandparents and, broke. He started crying. And again, I wasn't really prepared for it at that moment, because actually what had triggered it was just a very kind of straight up question. What would your grandparents think if they were looking down on you now in St. Lucia giving back to the island? And he completely choked up and, was very emotional at that point. And I think, why am I sharing that these are special moments? Because I think the context at that time, and to some degree now, was in the interviews that we would see with players, the questions that they would regularly answer were on default. Do you want to win the game in the weekend? Yeah, I want to win the game. How many goals do you want to score? I want to score lots of goals. How much do you want to impress the fans? Oh, I want to really impress the fans. So almost like a default, you just get used to seeing people in this kind of almost robotic way.
Yeah.
To actually get under the skin of who these people are and get a good understanding of who they are as humans was a real privilege, and something that really stuck with me and reminded me of how privileged I am to be able to stand opposite someone and listen to their life story.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And congrats to Andy for getting in that Hall of Fame. I think he was a fantastic player, an absolute baller at Newcastle. He was, unstoppable and menu.
Yes, yeah, special player.
Yeah. And is it, I mean, obviously you're coming back to your media side there, where I think we all know that footballers are much more media trained these days. And you're right, they probably have just a list of stock answers there. So I guess it's that part of the skill that you kind of now have, is really peeling back the layers of the onion, as it were, and trying, not intentionally trying to get a reaction, because you said that wasn't the case. It was real. It was a real question. And that's a real skill now.
I just think that Premier League football, arguably the biggest sports league in the world, and we have all of these incredible superheroes on the pitch doing wonderful, amazing things and celebrated for that. But we don't know who they are.
Yeah.
We don't know what's important to them, and to the extent that when they retire and start talking about the environment, sustainability, we're like, oh wow, I just never knew they had that in the locker. Once they start talking about the books that they read, we're like, oh my god, I'd read that book, and oh, I never thought that that player would read that. And I just find it strange. Because in any other area of entertainment, if it's a musician, we kind of know what they're about. We know that they're kind of interested in particular areas of life and culture. But with footballers, it's kind of just been hidden away. And I've felt that during my time as a full-time journalist, it was just, why am I going to ask someone if they want to win a football match? It's only interesting if they say no. So why would I waste that 1 minute 30 having that discussion when I could ask them tell us about the first book you read? That would be more revealing, in my view, than somebody just giving me an answer that they give 10 times in an hour to the line of journalists that are there. So what I started to do at that time is, actually, I had good enough relationships with some players to just go to their house. So I just go to their house with a camera and we just have a chat. So I did that with Jermaine Genius, did that with Benoit Sorokoto, did that with Emmanuel Adebayor. And from each of those interviews, we got new information and talked about stuff that wasn't necessarily, do you think you're better playing in this system or this system, which is interesting, and there's a place for that. But I was more interested in the human being. I was more interested in the fact that Benoit Sorokoto got the tube into training because he didn't want to get caught in traffic, and he wanted to, make sure his impact on the environment was lessened. I was like, so you get the tube, actually get on the tube. And I don't know, the fact that I was so astounded by this, which isn't astounding really, but then this is a superhero playing in the Premier League at the time.
Yeah,
that's interesting. That's for me interesting, and it might be someone who doesn't like football just watching this goes, "Oh my god, that's not interesting." But the context of football, that really is interesting. So, the ability to tell stories in a real kind of interesting way, the ability to look at how many different stories there are, like Jermaine Genus talking about hiding under a window because he was worried about the bailiffs coming when he was it was him and his mum. But
Mhm.
these are powerful stories, and a lot of the time these stories didn't make the final edit because people said, "Oh no, you're not talking about the game in the week."
Yeah.
So, are you joking? It's kind of like, look at
These
this.
are the nuggets. These are the
Yeah,
nuggets.
these are the nuggets. But at that time, there was nowhere for them to go necessarily if they didn't make the 1 minute 32-minute edit on the program that you were working on. So
Yeah.
then I would take that and I would take them to the BBC Sport website. At that time, the BBC Sport website was just like, look, no one really takes us that seriously over here. So if you've got any stuff and you're happy to spend your own time cutting it up and whatever, then if it's good enough, we'll put it through quality control and we'll put it up. And so that's what I started doing. And so a lot of that stuff, would be perfect for now because now if you look at the kind of interviews that are happening in this day and age, be it with influencers, be it with other players, a lot of it is about, tell us about your favorite meal. What's your cheat meal? What's this? And actually, that's the content that's doing really really well with younger audiences because they are really interested in who are these superheroes? Who are they really? To the extent that Haaland could do an interview and not talk about football, and it could still get millions of views because people are fascinated in who this superhero is, and I love it. I love it, and kind of sometimes I do sit back and wish that maybe I was a reporter now, and I was a little bit too early.
Mhm.
But there's something in being one of the first that's really kind of exciting. So no regrets, but no, I loved my time as a sports journalist, and still look for creative outlets in that space now. So it certainly teaches you a lot.
Yeah, and then sports journalism has obviously moved on a lot, and I think there is probably leading to something you just said there, just around being the first. But now, do you think there's too much in terms of they just need clickable, like clickbait articles, words, SEO? So sometimes actually the journalism quality of content has got worse.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's just so much. There's just huge quantities of content that are readily available on so many platforms. So you could easily sit there on Instagram and spend hours of your life looking at things that actually, probably aren't worthy of spending as much time as you are spending looking at that, and not maybe sitting down with your kids, reading a book with them and asking them how school was, or focusing on your side hustle or whatever it might be if you're someone who's a bit younger. I mean, whatever it is, I think there's just so much content to get lost in, and I think the quality content will always shine through. And also, we're all different in terms of what we're looking for,
Mhm.
which I think is wonderful. Some people, you know, will want to look for very analytical content on the spaces between players during a particular phase of the game, whereas somebody else, like me, will have an interest in that, but will probably be more attracted to the interview with the player and the player's sister, who's also a footballer and has had a different journey, and they talk about their family, etc., etc. So, you know, has the quality got worse? I guess it just depends on the lens you're looking at it through. For me, I just think there's more, and I just think um, we we can find what suits us best. So if you're subscriber to the Athletic, you know that's your jam, that's your thing, the
Mhm.
amount of detail, etc.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean to say that that's good, and articles that are like 200 words and you know graphics led aren't equally as good. So yeah, I think like all things, there's good and bad, but certainly having that array of choice is a positive thing.
Yeah, I think I read a stat the other day that the average person scrolls the length or the height of Big Ben every day, which just blows your mind. But I can see how it happens. A lot of people are moving to shorts compared to long form now. So yeah, you can get lost.
And I think I was reading about the fact that if you look at the machines, the gambling machines in like Vegas, for example, it's all about that movement, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that is that scrolling movement, that addiction to what's next, and right,
Yeah.
is that thing going to come up, the jeopardy, all of that is put together by very, very clever people who have studied addiction, studied all of these processes, and are making those traits work for their products.
Yeah. This might be like asking you to pick a favorite child, but do you have a favorite person you've interviewed?
I really enjoyed interviewing lots of different people for lots of different reasons. So like I had an hour with Usain Bolt. At a time, he was the biggest sports star on the planet for the documentary that I made. That was pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's like interviewing Benoit Sorokoto, who I got to know really well when he was at Spurs off the back of the Tottenham riots. So the riots that took place. We went for a walk around the area where there were burnt out buildings, etc. And he talked about community. He talked about the fact that he gets his hair done next door to the ground. I mean, he lived in Canary Wharf, but he travelled into the ground because a strong black community in Tottenham, having Afro hair. He wanted to find the best place for his hair. He wasn't going to have someone come to him in Canary Wharf all the time. Actually, he preferred to go into Tottenham and feel the people and feel the community. So actually, at a time when the community was literally burning, he wanted to be close to the community, and he wanted to step forward as a professional player playing for Tottenham, and actually say, no, this isn't something that's just happened near the stadium. Like, this has happened in our community, and our community is Tottenham Hotspur's Tottenham. So that felt like a really special interview. And yeah, I mean, it's funny looking back. It's the interviews where, like, Emmanuel Adebayor, went to see him in Madrid. I went to his house and we had a kickabout in his garden. It was great, but he was actually not in a happy place generally, because he was kind of on loan to Real Madrid. He wasn't in the Manchester City team. And we talked about the journey and actually expressed that, he felt he didn't want to be alive. Those were his words. So that created kind of big headlines around the world. And it wasn't the headlines around the world that made me feel I'd done a good job as a journalist. That wasn't the marker. It was the fact that I could sit opposite somebody and they could give me such a sensitive piece of information about themselves on camera and trust me to go away and do the right thing with that. That's a big deal. So yeah, it's the interviews where I've got new information, or people have revealed their story in a way that shows a lot of trust. And the biggest part of interviewing for me is the ability to shut up and listen.
Yeah.
Not a lot of people are good at it, particularly some of our interviewers on TV who are very impatient and actually sometimes make it a bit too much about them, in my view. Just being able to ask the question of why do you think that? Tell me more. Just those short questions sometimes are the most impactful things, because you enable people's space to be able to express themselves and to share. And yeah, interviewing is an art. I'm not sure I got anywhere near mastering it, but I certainly enjoyed it.
Yeah, I was always brought up, with the saying, you've got 2 ears, 1 mouth. So use it in that ratio. Got to listen.
I'm going to nick that one.
You went on then to co-found the Football Blacklist, which has obviously been going for a number of years now. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the Football Blacklist is a celebration of black excellence in football, founded by myself and Rodney Hines, who's the sports editor of the Voice newspaper here in the UK. The idea was we wanted to shine a light on brilliant black people working in and around football, and amplify their stories and their achievements, particularly to the next generation of young black people. So on the field of play in the Premier League, for example, we have 43% of the players are from black communities, which is astounding, really, when you look at the census data would probably show it's probably about, including people of mixed heritage, 7% of people here are black. So look at that 7% versus the 43% in the Premier League. It's a huge contribution, right? And of course, that's coming from a global base of black people in the Premier League, but still 43% of black people living here and from these communities or have come to this country to work. So a huge contribution. But when you look in the boardrooms, for example, one black director across all 20 Premier League clubs, Deji Davis at Brentford Football Club. You look at the dugouts, you've got Vincent Kompany, Nuno at Forest, but you're really struggling to name black managers. Coaches is getting a bit better, but still nowhere near that 43% mark. And that's without talking about people in the community doing fantastic things, people in the commercial area of the game, people in the media. So we wanted to shine a light on all these different people doing wonderful things in football from the black community, so that you could be a young black woman, be grown up in Middlesbrough, and you could look at this list and go, here's a black woman who's come up without a playing background and has managed to get a really cool job in football. Maybe I could do that. Or a young black boy in Brixton picks up the newspaper and sees a top lawyer who's actually also from South London, and has had no privilege to speak of, and comes up and has becomes a point of reference. So when you see it, there's a potential for you to believe you can be it. So really, really proud of the Football Blacklist. It started in 2008. Was it 15, 16 years later? We're recognized globally in terms of the kind of recognition that we have and the audiences that we have. We have a partnership with the Premier League for our celebration, an annual celebration that takes place in London. 700 people attended that last month. We have a partnership with the Football Association, the FA, where we go up and down the country to do regional celebrations, celebrating people in those areas, particularly focusing on community and grassroots. And the list itself, is kind of media from South Africa to the United States. It really has become a big thing, something that we're really proud of. And, we feel there's a long way ahead for it still, not just in football here, but also in other sports here in the UK. So there's a rugby blacklist and a tennis blacklist that's happening already, but also in the continent. Could this work in the NFL? Could this work in the NBA? Could this work in the MLS? I believe it could, because the context exists within those leagues, and it's a positive entry point to discussing some quite sensitive stuff, but which is solution driven within those discussions.
And how is the UK doing compared to the US soccer or football in Europe?
Well, I do some work with the MLS, so I know the MLS, pretty well, and their league is about 25% black players, and they're around about 10% black managers. They have been previously, and in fact, the last MLS playoffs was won by a black manager. So it's an interesting time there. However, why are they working to try and attract more black talent to the league? Because they know they want to address underrepresentation and improve the representation that they have, become a more diverse league, and a better performing league as a result of having greater diversity yields better business results. That's been proven by various reports. Probably the main report that highlights that is a McKinsey report, looking at how diversity means better business. So in terms of where we are here in the UK, certainly from a player base in England, the Premier League and the EFL, We have great diversity from the Black community. South Asian communities, and the South Asian community here in the UK is the largest ethnic minority community. We have big challenges in terms of players coming through. There is some good work being done on this, but that's an area of the game I think we need to talk more about. Why is there this underrepresentation? How do we address that? How do we create strategies that accelerate that change so that we're not talking about the underrepresentation of that group? But in terms of like coaching and management, the MLS have challenges as well, but are probably a little bit further advanced than what we are here in the UK. But both leagues are certainly talking about changing this, taking actions to try and address this underrepresentation. And that's good, because previously people have just said the best are the best and it will just happen naturally. And clearly, the 20 years I've been working in football, it hasn't happened naturally. So we need to be really intentional in terms of what we do to change that situation.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned obviously players, managers there, and I know something that you're working with the PGMOL. I get that wrong. Match officials. I mean, I think Uriah Rennie was the last black referee in the Premier League that I remember. Might be wrong.
Yeah, no, Uriah was officiating, was it some 17 years ago or so? But since then, this season, we've had Sam Allison, who's had 2 appearances in the Premier League. So we've moved forward in that regard this season. Akil Howson is I guess, old school talk linesman, new school talk assistant referee. So he is a full-time official in the Premier League. So he's been doing that all season, which is fantastic. Rebecca Welsh, is a female official in the Premier League, the first ever, in terms of in the middle as a referee. I just think Sonny Gill from the South Asian community, he's refereed in the Premier League. His brother Books has ran the line in the Premier League. So in the recent kind of year to 18 months, we've had some really big steps forward. However, how do we make that the norm and not the exception in terms of that diversity that exists? How can we make sure that we're looking at society and we're looking at officiating and we're seeing the same or similar levels of diversity showing up in our national sport? And I've been acting as a board advisor to the PGMOL, specifically around EDI, and helping the board move forward over the last 2 years. I've been really happy that during my time, and it's not because of me, I need to make that clear, that we've seen some really significant progress with not only representation coming through at the very top, but a lot of initiatives kind of like beginning to be baked into what happens across the officiating landscape. And many people before me have contributed and worked hard on that. Many people alongside me at the moment are working super hard to make sure that we're moving in the right direction in that space. And I have to say, someone like Mike Riley, who used to be the head of the referees, moved on last season. He did a lot of work on this. And Howard Webb, who's in now, has taken that baton on, and it's under his leadership that we've seen some of the work that was taking place under Mike come to fruition. So these appointments, Howard's been the person who's made sure that people on merit are getting opportunities, but within new systems to make sure the pathways that exist in officiating get the best talent to the top as swiftly as possible, so that people aren't stuck in a system where it takes 12, 15 years to get to a position they could have been a lot earlier in their career with a different pathway.
Yeah, and again, I'm not so sure on how this kind of works, but the likes of an Anthony Taylor, who referees a lot in the Premier League, how do referees kind of get their opportunity to referee more? And the people you mentioned there, are they currently kind of bouncing between Championship, League One, and get the occasional games? I don't quite know how that works.
Yeah, I mean, what's been put together for the opportunities that we've seen, those who bring a different diversity in the Premier League, and it's not just underrepresented groups, for example. The person who's had the most opportunities through the development group is a white male, because he's been performing the best and he deserves those opportunities. But what this new pathway through a development group has done is it's taking high potential officials, put them into a place where their development is supercharged, if you like, by giving them lots of support and making sure they are maximizing their talent and development as much as possible. And then if they are performing at the level that they're at, so for example, Sam Allison referees the majority of his games at championship level. So he would have to be having 6, 7 really top games in the championship, and then a decision would be made by a group of experts, not me, but officiating experts. It's time to give Sam a go on the Premier League, and sometimes that can be because an Anthony Taylor or Michael Oliver might be away on international duty, and that frees up spaces for other referees to be given an opportunity. So it's a much more dynamic system that's in place, and for me, it offers motivation to those officials that are in the system, that they're not going to have to sit um, within a system that is moving potentially too slowly for their level of ambition and, most importantly, their level of ability. But it's all done on, like, if you have 6 bad games in that development group, as judged by the experts, you've got no chance of getting near the Premier League. And it doesn't matter if you're black, white, male, female. You have to be performing well. And then when you get to the Premier League, there's no hiding at any level of really, but you have to be performing exceptionally well to therefore get another opportunity. So it's a meritocracy that I think is really helpful to the game. And through that development group, I think in years to come we'll look back and go, wow, look at the officials it really helped to bring through the system, and it will improve officiating 100%, no doubt about it.
Yeah, I mean, hats off to referees. I think it's one of the most essential yet thankless tasks in football. And they say keepers are crazy, but I think you'd have to be crazy to be a referee, personally.
Yeah, it's. I've learned a lot about referees as people, and they really do care about justice, and I see this in children a lot of the time. Something on the playground might have nothing to do with them, but because they've seen something that's happened that is morally wrong, that an injustice has been served, they will really be upset, and they will really express an ambition to change that. Why has that happened? And I think with these officials, they want to help to facilitate the best game possible. Um, they don't want to be the center of attention. They know that the sign of them having a really great game a lot of the time is when they step off the pitch and people aren't talking about them at all. They know that. And I've often thought, God, why would you put yourself in that position? But they're passionate about it. They really enjoy it. They love being out. It's the best seat in the house.
Yeah.
Being out there amongst the players, making those key decisions, being a central part of football. I think there's a lot to love there. And I think probably maybe sometimes we focus too much, as we do as human beings generally, in my view, on the negative. So you can have 100 positives, but you remember the one negative. It's a bit like social media,
Yeah.
put a bit of content together, and then you've got 20 really lovely comments about how much they love the content, but then there's one which is really negative and nasty, and that's the one you're thinking about when you go to bed at night. That's the one you're talking to your family about at the dinner table. Why? Why would we do that? I think it's human nature that we do that, and we need to recognize that to make sure that we're not feeling the harm of that kind of negativity too much, but actually acknowledging it's one of many comments that were made.
Yeah, it's a very, very tough job. So, fair play to them. Fair play to them. And I know 15 years ago, I think it is now, you set up BCOMS, which is the Black Collective of Media in Sport. At the time you set that up to where we are now, how do you think that that journey has gone?
I mean, things are markedly different. When I founded BCOMS, it was quite common just to have groups of pundits that were all white men, and there was no question about it. And I don't have a problem with a group of white men being pundits on the show. I have a problem when it's every show. And I have a problem when those sports that are being talked about and discussed involve 43% of black players, or 50% of black athletes. To me, that it was just jarring, and no one was really talking about it. So I went about trying to make that industry discussion more solution driven and louder. And by bringing people together, black people, white people, women, men, from the Asian community, we began to recognize the disparities in representation. We began to speak to leaders about solutions, and we began to put it on the agenda as being something that's important. And as a result of that, and the incredible talents that have come through in the last 15 years, it's quite rare to see a panel in certainly football or basketball or athletics of 3, 4 white men exclusively discussing sport. And if it does happen, I think we will have a little bit of a moment to go, oh, right. And it might be it's completely fine for that to be the case at that time, because the strategy of the channel has been to have one player from one side, one player from the other side, and a neutral pundit, and then the presenter. And actually, that happens to be, 4 white men. But I think the emergence of so many talented female pundits has really helped to reshape what our industry looks like. And I think, there's so many talented black former athletes has helped a lot. But also those who haven't played sport professionally. Adeola Depot comes to mind. JD Dyer comes to mind. Anita Jones comes to mind. There are so many who are coming through and are doing just such a good job that they can't be ignored. So fair play to the broadcasters in particular for recognizing the change that's needed. We're not there. Behind the camera, there's real lack of diversity in terms of producers, editors, decision makers. There's a lack of diversity there. The newspapers have big problems. They know this. I speak to a lot of the newspaper bosses. They want to become more diverse. They understand that they need to evolve and become more relevant to the lots of different audiences that they serve. But they've typically and traditionally struggle with becoming more diverse. The turnover is slow in terms of the people who are currently in the roles, and the pathways aren't as fluid and as maybe they perhaps could be. But the emergence of the digital world has given talent an opportunity to shine. So we're in a markedly different place to what we were when we started BCOMS. And that's because communities have come together. That's because great leaders have made good decisions. And that's because we've been open to change. And change is something people are often very resistant of because it's scary and they think it might involve them disappearing from something they absolutely love doing. But it's not that. It's not that. It's just creating a space where we ensure that our businesses, the way we communicate, our content is just totally relevant to make sure we're doing business as well as possible.
Yeah. And do you think people like yourself, obviously you are pushing for this positive change? On the flip side, I mean, Joey Barton's one that springs to mind. Do you think there's the resistance side that are trying, as you say, to kind of stop that because maybe they're afraid of that change?
Yeah, I mean, I think, people are scared of change when they don't think it involves them. But the reality is, it does involve them. We do want different views. We want views that are fair and that are the right side of the law and that aren't abusive. But we want different views. I always say, there was a time when it was like, oh, Leon, you've got a really diverse group of people around you. And I was looking, I was like, well, they contribute to diversity, but actually there's not many white men involved in the discussions I'm having around diversity. So therefore it's not that diverse. So if there's a table of 10 people who are like me, black, of mixed heritage, from North London, university educated. You know, the 10 of us are not diverse because we are all very similar. So therefore, we have groupthink in the same way a group of people of the same background but who are white and are male, that people would say that's groupthink, that's bad. But actually, if there's 10 of me, that's groupthink and that's bad. So we need to um, disrupt that thinking that a white man who might be not left wing, shall we say, but has centre of right or not far right clearly, but but different views is not part of the conversation. They absolutely are. And the ironic thing is, for years and decades, and even now, many of those people are still in the hot seat of power. So they're making the decisions. So when we're talking about a lack of black managers, it's not other black people who are saying, no, I don't want other black people. It's, there's those dynamics that people miss. They miss the context. But I also think maybe campaigners haven't been clearer in what they're saying, which is we're not saying get rid of you. We're just saying, we need a more diverse table, of which you are part of that table. And I think we can do a better job of that, because otherwise it becomes completely divisive, and someone's shouting here, and we get no closer to actually finding a better place for everybody, which is probably here, where the different views and standpoints exist, are allowed to coexist, and there's a mutual respect for what each another is saying, as long as it's anchored in respect. That's the main thing. Once you lose that respect, then none of this matters. Then it's just a free for all, and it might be entertaining for bystanders who have no part of it, but it's actually really dangerous, and it ends up with people getting hurt, and it ends up with bad things happening. So we need to really kind of be mindful of that, I think.
Yeah, and throughout your work, and again, I know you've set up lots of companies and you've run lots of things, but you was it 2022 you got your MBE, your awarded MBE?
Yes, I picked it up in 2022, and I was awarded it at the end, beginning of 2021. So it was, what's the best way to describe this? Like, getting an MBE was never ever a thought, never ever a thought. And so when it happened, I was, I guess, I was happy because of the level of recognition.
Yeah.
But also, I'd known a few people who hadn't declared it, but who had turned down on us. And they turned down on us because of this word empire and what it means. And because of that, I felt slightly conflicted about whether I should accept it or not. Ultimately, after speaking to, loved ones in my family, and a few friends, I decided to accept it because of a number of reasons. One, my grandparents, they would have loved to have the opportunity to get an MBE, but unfortunately, they arrived in this country at a different time, at a time where they were never ever really going to have an opportunity to be excellent, because of all sorts of things, discrimination, not necessarily based on race all the time, because half my family is white, half my family is black. But there were reasons why they were not given the opportunity to receive an MBE. So it would have meant everything to them, their sacrifice, for me to be offered one. And the second point was just, around how do you use an MBE? How do you use an honour? Once it's up on the shelf, and people occasionally use it, what does it actually mean? And I spoke to somebody who'd received one before, and he does a lot of work in the community. That's his thing. He works in the community. He does excellent work in the community in Birmingham. And he said, it's interesting, when you start writing a letter with MBE on it at the bottom, people start coming back to you. And so he was writing to say, we need more funding for these kids to do more activities. We need more space. We need more visibility of these issues. And so he used that to bring positivity to his community. So I felt, could I do the same? I like to think so. And there's no doubt about it that actually having an MBE, in my experience, does give you greater visibility, does enable you to communicate with people in power more easily. So because of that, I feel like I'm staying true to myself and what I am about, or I hope I am about, in trying to use what I have for positive means.
Am I right in saying your wife has an MBE as well?
Yeah, she does. Yeah, she does,
Oh.
and she had it before me as well. Um, it, again, there's no one in her family with an MBA.
Yeah,
So the fact that she had one, I guess. Well, no, it wasn't that she had one that I'm going to get one. There was never that thought in my mind.
yeah.
She's done exceptional things. That's her journey, and I'm really proud of her because the sacrifice it takes to deliver things is nuts. And the majority of people who make that sacrifice never get thank you in this
Mm.
way. So I feel that her and I are very fortunate in being offered those honours, and we both chose to accept it. But yeah, certainly never felt like part of the plan. And when I meet people I went to school with, they're still astounded. They're like, "What?" um, just because it doesn't really
Okay.
happen, you know. And I like that. I like that. I think if I was in a world where I would one day expect an MBE or something, um, that's just not real. That's not real, or there's not value attached to what those honours are about and mean and what you want to do with them. If it feels like there's a sense of entitlement, um, so yeah, so a strange relationship with it. I'm still kind of working it out. For being totally honest, sometimes I feel massively proud, and sometimes I feel massively awkward. And I think that's probably where I'm meant to be right now with it.
Yeah, true. Well, as you say, if it helps you advance the work that you want to do, and those gets that voice out for all of the great work you do, then it's worth it.
Yeah, no. Ultimately, that's where I've landed, and also I want to respect the fact that there's lots of people who haven't got an honour, who would do everything possible to get one, but I have one, so I am hugely grateful for that. And yeah, I hope those people who are working hard to get one do get one, because um, it can change things really positively.
Great stuff. And for obviously we're in April now, but for 2024 and beyond, what's next on your agenda?
Yeah, well, in terms of what's next, we'll be up and down the country for Football Blacklist regional events. The next year, we'll be planning from now through to next year for the National Football Blacklist event, which will be bigger and better. I hope that's the plan. So we're kind of already in planning mode for that, despite it being a year away. I think it's just about impact. The work that I'm involved in. If I ever feel like it's just being on a treadmill on setting 9 and kind of not really pushing yourself and going through the motions, um, the way I am as a human, that's not enough. Um, and sometimes I fear I'm going to burn myself out because of that feeling of it not being enough, but it's not enough. Um, I want to be making more of an impact. I want to build on the success that we've had. I want to give people who work with me more opportunities to flourish and make an impact. Um, and these are things that are entirely possible with good planning, good hearts, dedication, and most importantly, a space for big ideas. I'm a big ideas person. That's my strength, I feel, and that's what I love doing. Sitting down with a blank piece of paper and saying, "How can we change the world in some way?" Um,
Amazing.
what a privilege to be in that position. Most people are in a position where they're kind of sitting down, how do I pay my bills every day? So if I can be in a position where I sit down and I go, how can I come up with great ideas? Then that is a blessing beyond belief. and it's never ever lost on me. And I hope if it ever does become something I take for granted, someone pulls me up on it pretty sharpish.
Yeah.
It's right, because we live in difficult times. So for me to be able to go out of my door every morning and develop ideas in sport, which I love, working on important issues, then that is a huge, huge blessing.
Amazing. And with all of the work you do you actually get a chance to go over to White Hart Lane?
Yeah, I do. I've got a season ticket. I make most games. I really enjoy going to the games. There have been times when I didn't. You know, when you work in sport, work in football, and then you get to your weekend and you're at football all day. I know it sounds a bit strange, but sometimes you kind of feel like you want a complete break from the industry. However, you know, my love for sport is deep, so it's wonderful to get to go and, you know, just enjoy the theatre of sport, the story of sport. What's going to happen in the game today? No one knows.
Yeah.
You know, that's why we turn up. If we knew what the result was going to be, we wouldn't turn up. Yeah, I get down to Spurs and yeah, still go with my dad every week. We've been going together since 1989. So seen a lot of good, a lot of bad, and a fair bit of ugly as well. So yeah, it's great to go down to Spurs every week.
Yeah, so it's good to go there rather than go away, rather than the Newcastle and Fulham games that have been happening recently. Your away form has just been off the boil.
Yeah, although Aston Villa wasn't bad, but I just think, and I was saying this in a podcast this morning, you know, handball is really about bravery on the ball, and I think we stopped being a bit brave recently, and maybe that's kind of, you know, how a long season mentally can get to players, or maybe we've just been worked out. Maybe the opposition have kind of worked out handball, and we're going to have to think of a few other things to do to kind of get back to the kind of form that had us top of the table for a little period of time. So no, it's exciting times to be a Spurs fan. You know, last season we were struggling to finish 8th, I think.
Yeah.
And this season, we've genuinely got a chance of being in the Champions League. And I'm not sure that would even be good for Tottenham Hotspur Football Club at this point in time. I think we'll probably do with having a season not in the Champions League while we develop our squad further. But I think that would probably be a very unpopular opinion amongst them.
Well, as a West Ham fan, Europe hasn't done us too well, to be honest. And I can't say much after the Palace result of the weekend as well. So I'm going to be dissecting that one with some people later for sure.
Right, I'll be tuning in for that.
Leon, great. Thank you very much. You've been brilliant. What's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Yeah, Twitter, at, or is it called X now?
Yeah.
At Leon_Man, so Leon_Man, MANN. Exactly the same on Instagram. Instagram, I'm just having a bit of fun and telling the stories of sport and my life. On X, I'm probably making statements about things I feel about race inequality in sport and things that are going on. Please also follow the Football Blacklist. Please also follow BCOMS. Just by typing them into the search engine, they'll pop up on most social media. Hopefully there's some useful things that are said across all those platforms.
Fantastic. We'll put all of the links, of course, in the description so everyone can follow you. But Leon, I will let you enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you very much for being an unsung hero of sport.
Thank you, Mark. Much appreciated.
Cheers, mate.